everyone, and welcome to another episode of our podcast, Lewis and Friends, where we're focusing on climate conversations. And this is part of the series this year to really lean into the operations behind AII's Fashion Climate Fund, our role in helping to decarbonize the apparel textile supply chain, and various parts of our work that we're doing in collaboration with the industry and many stakeholders. And today I'm joined with Gio Zenteno, our head of blended capital at the Apparel Impact Institute. Hello, Gio.
Hi, Lewis. A pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you, and thanks for joining me. And I'm really excited about this conversation today because I think this is an area that demonstrates the maturity of the work, not only that AII is doing, but where the sector is as a whole. It feels to me like we're primed and ready to be in the conversations of how we're going to incentivize finance in the factories. And I just would love to get your perspective on that in terms of why AII would even build out and take on a strategy for deploying finance to facilities. Tell me a little bit about your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it's a great timing for us to be undertaking something like this. Coming out of COP28 last year, blended capital was really at the top of everybody's mind. Every other session was about blended capital. Every other session was about bringing all types of stakeholders together and really making sure that the use of capital and what they can bring to the table is as efficient as possible. And AII throughout the last couple of years has been doing a great job in providing support and making sure that programmatic activities go to where they should be. In that work, we've discovered a couple of things for manufacturing facilities around the globe, and that is that there is a lack of access to finance for them. It's really too expensive, or the requirements that a lot of banks and financial institutions are putting together are too onerous for them to fulfill. So they end up not taking a lot of this available capital out there. And the use of blended capital incentivizes the use of those available capital pools by making sure that the cost of capital, i.e. the cost of borrowing for these facilities, is low enough and attractive enough so that they can take it on. The work that we've been doing with AII has enabled a graduation pathway. That is to say, we participate with facilities and we provide our programmatic work to facilities. They do a couple of investments that have very quick paybacks and have very low ROIs. But then the bigger investments, they're not really willing to do, just because of this lack of available capital. So now through our blended capital strategy, what we're trying to do is incentivize these facilities to take on additional funding so they can decarbonize and clean up their operations.
Let's define blended capital. It's a term that I know is being kind of thrown out a lot in white papers, and you're seeing it show up more in climate finance. What is meant by the term blended capital? What does that mean?
Yeah, I'm going to use a very literal example of this, but really think about a blender. You know, you have your structure and you're putting in different ingredients, and each of those ingredients on its own could probably serve as its own meal, but blended together, they make something totally different. So take, for example, a loan from a traditional bank. They're really more focused on the return they can have from the loan itself, which means that they're focused on interest rate. But then take on a philanthropic partner, which is really more interested in the impact that their financial contributions are going to make to a specific industry. So by themselves, they work. If you put them together, you emphasize both the financial returns of a loan or an investment combined with sustainable impact goals. So together, you're really creating a synergy that alone would have been more difficult to achieve. So in that sense, we're doing the same thing. We're putting commercial capital together with philanthropic capital with a little bit more concessional. That is to say, players that don't require a market rate risk-adjusted return, And by putting them all together, we're really creating synergies across industries. We're making sure that stakeholders are able to really generate the impact that is needed through affordable pools of capital.
So you've got commercial interest and rates that could be typically higher because they need to make money, and that's what the purpose of financial institutions is, to return, investment of value back to shareholders, to the bank, and then those who benefit from that as shareholders of those accounts. And then philanthropy doesn't need a return. So if you're putting them together, then in effect, you can potentially lower interest rates or create better deals or terms, right?
Exactly. So it's more about accessibility of capital, and within that spectrum, we have different things. We have lower interest rates. We have lower costs of due diligence. So making sure that going out there to visit a client becomes less and less expensive to do. We have lowered requirements of, or I guess, lower information asymmetry between both layers. We have a reduction in costs on reporting requirements. So there's a lot of things that can help the accessibility of capital, not just the affordability of capital.
Yeah.
So that's what we're aiming to do with this.
And then in the middle, you also have development banks, which are, as I understand, regionally focused and regionally based, and their funds oftentimes come from World Bank or IFC related, right? So explain to me a little bit about the middle, because you've got, like you described, the commercial banks that, going to have a high interest rate, or potentially they have their own terms that they need to make a return on. Philanthropy, we just described as not needing to have a return. Tell me about this middle group called development banks.
Yeah, the middle is very interesting because they are required to make a return, mainly because they use the funds that they invest into and any returns that they get from those investments to reinvest in future projects. So they need to make sure that these pools of capital are good enough and are performing well enough so that they can get reinvested. Their whole premise is built around the performance of the investments that they make up to a certain point. They don't want to make a killing out of these investments. They really just want to make sure that that they have revolvingness in mind. They have a very wide reach. So, for example, you mentioned IFC. They have been doing thousands and thousands of projects across the world. So the benefit of having a partner like IFC is that they're able to, that they can provide a very wide network of both financial institution partners that are locally based, but they can also make direct investments into facilities in order to make a demonstration effect or an example out of an investment that they want to showcase to the market. Another example, and I think this is very relevant to the conversation, is the Asian Development Bank, because over 60% of the total production of apparel and footwear is located in Southeast Asia. So they become very relevant when we're thinking about blended capital, and a very good partner to be involved with.
And so, as you're describing it, the development banks have a purpose and a mission beyond just the return on investment, and that's related to long-term economic stability or development of the country. They have an interest in the well-being of the economy of that country, right? And so, whereas the commercial bank at the top isn't necessarily, while it impacts them, that's not their primary focus, right? So you have this sort of hybrid focus in a development bank of two purposes: return on investment, but also the long-term stability and economic development of that country. Is that accurate?
Exactly. And they've been doing this for the last 50, 60 years. So that means that they have perfected this art of making sure that they're able to invest in countries and in projects that both yield a good enough return, but also exceptional impact. So that means that that's a project will only go through if there are certain metrics on the impact side that have to be fulfilled. And this is usually done before they make an investment into the project, right? There's a baseline measurement that they need to do in order to make sure that, at least that bare minimum is covered. Anything beyond that is a very good extra. But yeah, you're correct. It's a very good, another good showcase of what blended capital is.
So then you've got blended capital is not just the blending of the sources of capital like government funds, philanthropic family office funding, development banks, commercial banks. It's also a blending of the asset class too, right? Like grant dollars plus maybe debt dollars plus equity dollars. Like you can combine them and package them as a product that has different types of capital, i.e., blended, right? So that's the point, right?
Exactly. And the blending itself will, or I guess each one of the ingredients themselves will bring on their different requirements for the investments. For example, as you mentioned, a philanthropic player is going to require zero to even potentially a loss in their investments. So being placed in a position where they can absorb most of the losses is going to be beneficial for them, whereas a more senior lender like a commercial bank is going to want to have a lot more protection of their investments. So they might be making a lesser return, but in exchange, they will be having a more senior position when they get paid back. And so that spectrum is sort of what we're considering within the blended finance space.
So now at AII, we've said we're building out a $2 billion unlock of blended capital, right? And so tell me, how are we going about that? What is the role that we're playing? And just specifically, what are we doing to turn that vision and concept and all these ideas we're talking about into action?
2 billion might seem like a very tall order, but within the ecosystem, we've calculated that there's a $1 trillion opportunity. So once you think of it, it's a speck of dust in the universe, right? But still, we think that the demonstration effect that providing this $2 billion out there to the market is going to be strong enough that it will catalyze other investors to come in and see the decarbonization or the GHG, the greenhouse gas emission reduction potential that investments have in the market. And how we're doing this? Well, it's we have developed a plan for the next 10 years, really, in order to make sure that we're able to reach the target. The first steps we took last year, where we convened twice on both very good stakeholder retreats that brought a lot of engaging stakeholders to the market. The first one was during Climate Week in New York, where we brought over 70 players, both brands, financial institutions, philanthropic players, in order to showcase the work that we've been doing with facilities on the ground and making sure that they understand that there is this gap in terms of financing that really needs to be filled, because otherwise we are not going to reach the 2030 targets of a minimum of 2.5 degree increase, which will then have catastrophic effects for humanity and for the planet. So by doing so, I think we spurred on a very strong conversation of what's next. What can we do as brands and as financial institutions, as philanthropies, as foundations, and as other stakeholders in order to make sure that we cover this gap. And this spurred on the conversation that we had on our second retreat at the Bellagio Center in partnership with Rockefeller Foundation, where we invited some 22 players or stakeholders to really have a chat and really have a dig through about their capabilities and what they can do in order to make sure that we hit this $2 billion in demonstration effect capital, to make sure we spur on the conversation a little bit forward. Out of Bellagio came three very concrete working groups. The first one is an infrastructure working group that will deal with the creation and generation of a very actionable pipeline, where we will hopefully be seeing investments that are already ready to go from facilities that AII has worked with, that will fuel the second and third work streams. The second is a guarantee working group mechanism, where we will be trying to provide financing guaranteed by third parties. How that works is we will be partnering up with local financial institutions who will provide loans to local manufacturing facilities. The difference in operating procedures and the way that we're doing things is that we're including a guarantee that will accompany or will cover 100% of this loan that the facility will be taking in order to make the bank, one, more comfortable in providing this loan to a facility that they don't know, that they haven't engaged with before, and that has very limited information in terms of future cash flows. And two, making sure that the assets required in order to cover for this loan don't need to be provided by the manufacturing facility itself. They can be provided by a third party, such as the IFC that we mentioned before, the Asian Development Bank, or third-party guarantee providers who charge a fee for this. But the way that we're innovating is that we're asking third parties, so in this case, brands who are aligned with their science-based targets, to pay for the guarantee fee so that the total cost of getting that loan is not increased significantly, but remains at an affordable level and is at the same time guaranteed by this third party. To put it in sort of more plain terms, is if you're taking a mortgage on your house and you have a very rich relative, that very rich relative is essentially signing over to the bank saying, if Louis or if Gio fail to pay, I will then cover for what they failed to pay. So this makes that capital a lot more accessible for facilities on the ground. The aim is to have some 2 to 3 facilities deployed or with capital deployed within the next 2 to 3 months with affordable rates, and then taking that concept and really growing it and making sure that it's scalable enough for other players to replicate across the globe. The third working group is developed around a blended capital fund that will be managed by a third party and will then on lend at affordable rates to local facilities on the ground. And this fund will essentially be global and will be hopefully sponsored by one of the large multilaterals of the world.
So, okay, that was really good information. Okay, so as I'm hearing it, the 3 working streams coming out of this Rockefeller Foundation sponsored Bellagio retreat were one around kind of the infrastructure for building a marketplace of solutions. So that, like, right now we're building a climate solutions portfolio that are going to have efficiency programs or electrifying or, eliminating the use of on-site coal burning with boilers and, lots of different initiatives that we're going to scale. So that's this portfolio, and the Fashion Climate Fund is making grants towards those initiatives and those technologies. But to get them pipelined into facilities and to incentivize facilities to want to implement those improvements, i.e. also use their own capital or borrow money, there needs to be some market conditions that exist, right? So creating a marketplace, as you described it, is the first work stream. Is what are all the potential conditions or structures that need to be around globally moving these technologies and solutions into their ideal financing structures, right? So that's this initial one. And then secondly, you mentioned the loan guarantee model, and I want to come back to that in a minute because I have a couple questions about that one too, which puts up guaranteeing. There's through the role of AII convening brand retailers and other philanthropies and partners, we can potentially guarantee those loans. So if they default, they don't hit the bank, they hit that loan guarantee structure, right? And that helps create better terms. Ideally, you don't want any defaults. Like in this world, in an ideal world, nothing defaults and all the loans get paid. But we're taking on the realities where commercial and even the development banks would be more interested to get involved in riskier loans if they knew somebody was standing up, or like in the case of the rich aunt or the rich uncle, somebody's standing and saying, hey, if anything goes south, I'll pay, And so that creates some stability, right? And then the third one, as you describe it, is this sort of larger global fund, of which maybe loan guarantees are a type of thing we're doing, but that can look at lots of other vehicles, because it's not just going to be loan guarantees. There's going to be first loss structures and all these other types of structured deals in the blended capital world. And they're all going to be unique to regions, to suppliers, to the parties that are involved, from the banking perspective to the philanthropy perspective. They're all going to look different, right? So that's this larger kind of global context of a blended capital fund. Did I describe those three things well? Based on how you said them, I was kind of repeating it back. Does that sound accurate, or
Perfect.
anything to clarify?
I think it's perfect. I mean, and this is the initial stage. What we want to do is take the learnings that we get from these and make sure that AI becomes the marketplace for financial tools, really. And if you see each one of these as financial tools, then there are other funds out there that may be targeting apparel and footwear, or renewable energy and energy efficiency, which can then have a knock-on effect on the apparel sector. So what we're going to try to aim to do is have a portfolio approach, just like we have on the CSP, to make sure that we're able to vet, validate, and in some cases invest into some of these financial tools, so that there is a marketplace for both suppliers and financial suppliers to come together and make sure that there is enough capital that is accessible for everybody.
You said something interesting at the beginning, which you also just touched on, which is this access to capital. We hear different things, right? Sometimes we hear like, the biggest problem is we don't have enough access to capital. The suppliers don't have the access to capital. And then you hear other people say, there's plenty of money out there. The problem isn't the capital. The problem is like just that, the access, right? So it's connecting the two things. Like, yes, there's a lot of available capital and a lot of commitments being made by these institutions for climate finance and sustainable finance and ESG investment. Like, we hear all this. So why isn't it happening? And I think that's the answer, is because you need someone or some group or commitment to figuring it out. And I'm over here like turning my hand, like it's sort of figuring it out, how to actually make the conditions attractive enough for the supplier, for the bank, for the philanthropy, whoever's involved. You've got to change some of the conditions, and they're not all going to look the same, right? And that's this whole idea of creating a marketplace to say, this is how we're going to route the available capital specifically into projects and help facilitate it, make it easier, make it faster, and make it better for all the parties involved, right?
Exactly. And one of the main problems really is not, as you mentioned, is not the what investors like to call the dry powder out there, which is the available capital out there. It's a problem of mainly information asymmetry, right? Local banks oftentimes don't have the networks, or don't have the connections to access these thousands and thousands of potential projects out there, because that would require a very big capital structure with a lot of people essentially going out there and making sure that they talk to all of these people. Financial institutions at the same time don't have the firepower to make sure that all of the analysis is done in a manner that is, compliant with their regulations and their policies. At the same time, facilities don't. I mean, their main focus is production. Their main focus is making sure that the end client, in this case, brands, is able to offtake the production that they've been contracted to do. So in that sense, they also don't have the time, the firing power, sometimes even the know-how of what type of capital is out there. How can I make sure that, that there's the right partner out there for me who will not only ensure that I take on this capital and install whatever piece of equipment I'm acquiring, but also making sure that it's done in an efficient manner and that I'm able to report correctly to that financial institution. So by making sure that we're able to correctly address this information asymmetry as AII, we're able to put good capital to good use. And that really is what we're trying that really is what's going to bring a lot of impact to the table.
And it's the perfect role of an organization like ours as a convener to be able to help each one of these stakeholder groups create a stronger value proposition, right? Because if everybody's not happy, if everybody doesn't see a benefit, then it's not going to happen. It's not going to work because you've got two parties who are ready to deploy capital and one party who says, I have no incentive to take on any of that finance because the incentives aren't strong enough. And likewise, similar, right? Like you've got an appetite to borrow, but an institution says too risky, right? So the role of us as a convener at AII is not only to bring all these parties together literally in the room, but also to figure it out as a collaboration and then activate, right? And then demonstrate. You use the word demonstration, which I love. $2 billion worth of demonstration between now and 2030 of capital in the forms of small, medium, and large size loans or other blended capital packages that are coming in to show this is what it looked like in this case scenario. This is what it looked like in that case scenario. And it can be replicated because what we're trying to show is this works, gets carbon out. Everybody's happy because they maintain business, they, grow their business, they, and these are the things that we can't necessarily promise right from the outset, but that's the intent, right? And it is that ultimately a business who becomes more sustainable is future proofing their long-term position within the market.
Exactly. And if you're not doing this right now, you're at risk of becoming a laggard. A lot of the assets that are currently being used, that use coal as a mechanism for fuel, will eventually need to be replaced. If you don't do it right now, you're going to have to do them at some point. If you wait long enough for that to happen, you may run the risk of losing the business that you currently have, right? Because brands, consumers are really gearing themselves up and are really targeting more conscious consumption. So by making this investment right now, you're making sure that in the future, as you mentioned, you are covered for any potential changes or effects that climate change is going to have, which is going to be fairly inevitable at this point. We're going to see some changes.
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of it's not yet table stakes from a supplier position to be fully sustainable to maintain business, but it's getting closer and closer by the day that suppliers are setting their own science-based targets. They're calculating their own carbon. They're looking to remain more competitive, as this is another way in which we are a preferred supplier. Not only do we make amazing product, we meet good price points, we deliver on time, we also run a sustainable operation that our business partners can add to their story around how apparel is being made, how their products are being made. They're being made with clean energy and clean water and, healthy chemistry and all the other environmental KPIs that are increasingly critical to do business on the planet.
Exactly. It's if you want to see it this way, it's going to be a differentiator because we know that a lot of these facilities can be cookie cutter. And if you have a differentiator on your end, which is this cleaner production facility, not in terms of hygiene or anything like that, but in terms of energy, that will differentiate you from your neighbors right next door who may or may have not done these investments. But if you make certain that you do, then that increase in value, you'll be able to see 10, 15 years down the line. Whereas maintaining business as usual might not be as expensive right now, or might even be seen as a cost-cutting approach, but down the line, it'll hurt you. So it's much better to make these investments right now.
And, what's proven through programs like our Clean by Design, that ultimately there's a payback on all of this, which means creating more efficient use of energy, water, others. It lowers your bills, long term. And so that payback period, is really fast when you're doing low-hanging fruit investments for efficiency. Gets a little bit longer when you start to take on what we call CapEx, like bigger, larger expenses of replacing equipment, installing renewable electricity, battery storage, all that gets a little bit more expensive. So that payback may be longer, but ultimately we're looking at a future where we're running much more efficient, modern, and good for planet production, right?
Exactly. You'll be ahead of competition. You'll be ahead of regulation. You'll be ahead of costs. I mean, there's a number of things that really enhance the valuation of the company if you have a sustainable finance approach to it, or just a general sustainable approach to it.
So let's talk about the suppliers for a minute, and a future podcast with this topic. I'd love that we bring some of the suppliers into the conversation, and we had them with us in our recent retreats, specifically in Bellagio. We had two big manufacturers represented with us, sending their finance leads, right? Sending their CFO or their folks that are really looking at the investment strategies, which I think is really interesting and different now. We had the same thing on the brand side. We didn't just have the sustainability and sourcing people in the room. We had people from the CFO team or corporate treasury, right? So my first question, and I will get back to the supplier question, but why is it important now that we've got the folks coming to the table beyond just our sustainability leads? We have the finance leads at these companies that are looking across all the financial planning and budgeting and strategy from a finance perspective. They're not just looking at climate, they're looking at everything the business does, and we're getting them in the room. Why is that so critical?
Well, I think it boils down to the interconnectivity of sustainability and finance. One really can't live without the other. Is we're, down the line of overproduction, overconsumption, over purchasing, over everything really, then it's really not going to matter how strong your balance sheet is or how much in revenues you generated the year before, because there is not going to be really a marketplace for the things that you're selling for anymore. In that same sense, a sustainability team on its own, without the firing power of the balance sheets of the finance teams, has a very limited scope and very limited power as to what they can influence within the marketplace. Where we are really past the stage of making sure that we implement very small projects down the ground, because what we really need now is scale. And by making sure that these two teams come to the ground, talk to each other, is the only way that we're going to make investments such as the ones that we proposed in the pilot project or in the pilot stage before a reality. The finance teams need to make sure that there is some sort of return that they're seeing for their finance, because otherwise it might be easier to just put them in an investment portfolio where they're generating 2-3% a year. But they need to really understand the math behind all of these investments. At the same time, the sustainability teams need to make sure that they can quantify the impact being generated by these projects. So we need to be able to make sure that both teams come together to these types of retreats, because that's when we have the opportunity of really having them drill down on the problems that we're facing. And in this case, it comes down again to accessibility, affordability, and making sure that suppliers are able to understand what is being asked of them, because they have in numerous occasions said that they've been feeling out of the conversation, that they are the ones that are required to pay for absolutely everything. And by making sure that we bring consensus to the table and we bring different voices to the table, we're making this a more equitable type of approach, and making sure that all of the stakeholders have their voices heard, and that we design vehicles and tools specific for their own problems. Because it's of no use for us to say, hey, here's another fund out to the market that is $300 million and is not going to be used, right? We don't gain anything from a fund like that. What we gain from is putting out there a tool that suppliers actually feel attracted to and want to use.
Yeah, I think that is also one of the more exciting things about this work now is co-creation with the supplier in the room, and oftentimes leading the conversation towards the development of a tool or a product, because without it, none of this happens, right? And so too often we leave the right stakeholders out of the room. So one of the other considerations, I think, is, as I said, we had two major suppliers represented with us, and then the voice of other suppliers in the room with us. And at that Bellagio retreat, but do we have the right people in the room? And I think that's something we need to continuously ensure that those who actually need to have access to this capital are the ones that we're involving, not just the ones who may not have a hard time getting a loan or maybe don't already have enough capital in a corporate treasury account that they can leverage or borrow against, or, so I think that's increasingly going to be important for us that we don't just have those tier one suppliers that are large enough that they don't need the capital, but we engage them to develop strategies around their scope 3 emissions. And that's some of the things that I've started to hear from these suppliers too, is my supply chain also needs to do this work, which means I need to engage them and help bring them into this conversation so that we're getting small, medium enterprises and a lot of different types of supplier voice and intelligence and strategy into the room, right?
Exactly. And I think if we do our jobs correctly, we can, the aim really is to get down to that smallholder farmer level where microfinance might be the most, appropriate tool to use, but making sure that we design tools and that we incorporate tools within our portfolio that are able to take a look at that capital continuum and that waterfalling or trickling down of targets that is naturally or should naturally happen, right? And as you mentioned, the two partners that we brought to the table, they were already thinking about implementing a strategy that goes well beyond them. They require their own suppliers to have a cleaner production line, and in time, these smaller suppliers will require their own suppliers to have more cleaner production. So I think that's the only way to really clean up and make sure that that it's not just skimming off the top and making sure that it's only the cream that gets cleaned up, but it's the whole cappuccino.
And then the ability that everything we do, given that we're a nonprofit, also is publicly available in the form of case studies, strategies, that we're sharing how the models worked, and that we actively invite replication of all of this, because we're not going to touch every supplier on the planet. We're not going to unlock $1 trillion in investment, but we can demonstrate with 2 billion as a goal and then say, copy us, replicate, shift the market, in terms of more of these types of products. So the other thing that I think super interesting is, back to getting the treasury and the finance people in the room. I was having a conversation with a colleague in our world back during Climate Week in New York, and we were talking about the need to have an investment strategy at the brand retailer level and also at the supplier level. And that investment strategy doesn't mean that you have to pay for everything, nor are you are you required to put up all the capital? But what you do have is a role in this incentive and bringing the right partners to the table, right? So what is the role that each one of us plays, so the other actor or player, whether it's a development bank, a commercial bank, or philanthropy, can plug into the system and let those who are in the business to deploy that kind of capital do it. But the brand retailer and the supplier have a role within that as securing, de-risking, future-proofing, borrowing, everybody's got a role. So with that, what we came up with is there's a need for an investment strategy with every one of these stakeholders. And if the brand retailer and the CFO or the treasury team doesn't have an investment strategy for climate, then they don't have a climate strategy. And I thought that was a really bold statement that this colleague made, but it does get me to the role that AII can help in helping those individuals in treasury or finance at the brand level and at the supplier level have a guidebook or some kind of playbook. So tell me a little bit about what AII is doing to help support the finance teams by building out a sustainable finance playbook.
Yeah, so this this idea was I think really well perceived by a lot of our brand partners, and when we pitched it to a lot of the facilities that we're working with, they also said, yes, magnificent. We have not seen something like this that is tailor specific for the industry. And what this is really is simple. it's making sure that all of this that we're talking about right now, blended capital, the different uses of finance, the different use of investments within the industry, are well understood by pretty much everybody. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we have a tiering mechanism where we'll produce one big document, so the actual playbook for suppliers or for brands, and that it's geared towards the level of understanding of sustainability that is embedded for each one of their for themselves and at the stage that they're at, right? So if we have a beginner, we don't really want to throw a lot of these, more technical pieces of information in terms of SBTI calculations, of carbon allocation, of blended capital structures that have worked in very specific countries. We want to start with the basics and making sure that they understand why the connection between finance and sustainability is a strong one and is here to stay. And basically, you go to the back of the pack if you don't have a climate sustainability investment strategy, right? For those in the middle of the pack, or the ones that are a little bit more comfortable with investments but are not ready yet to commit to something like a blended capital structure that is going to require you to invest for the next 10 to 12 years, but are more ready to invest into ad hoc projects and make sure that they first test out their capabilities, then we're building out something for those in the middle so that they understand how the calculation of one investment dollar translates into an X amount of carbon emission tons removed from the marketplace. And then something a little bit more technical, a little bit more, I guess, specific for the ones that are more advanced and are willing to undertake more either risky type of investments or investments that require a bit more financial savviness. And for those, we're also making sure that there's something specifically created so that the finance teams are able to speak with the sustainability teams on the same terms. This can be replicated hopefully across different industries. So alluding to what you were saying before, we don't want it to remain within the apparel and footwear industry, but we want auto to take it on. We want healthcare to take it on. Make sure that enough players out there are using the same type of playbook approach so that corporates are able to develop their internal sustainability investment capabilities and put the dollars that they have available for this to good use and not to replication of projects.
We're in a moment right now where a lot of funds are emerging, even just in our space. Like there's some equity funds for building out the energy grid in countries, whether it's wind or solar. There's some debt funds that are for supplier finance, and some brands are doing that on their own and creating their own funds around that. And then, suppliers have to choose which one do I borrow from or take. Then there are philanthropic funds to help, create pilots and to test out new innovations and materials. And there's just a lot of asks that are being put on these big companies right now to fund everything and to participate in everything. And so as you're describing it, and as I get excited about this work too, it's really saying, hey, look, we just told you we need $1 trillion. It's going to come from a lot of different places. It's not really competition here. It's where are you best positioned to participate in this work? You've got only so many arrows in your quill. Is that the term? That you're ready to shoot at this climate issue. And everyone's going to be different. Different companies are going to have a different appetite. They're going to have a different access to their capital. They have it tied up in certain things. They have it allocated in different types of budgets. And it's going to look different. And so we want to create something that is a guidebook or a playbook that says, here's the information. And now taking that, you can come up with your own financial plan, your own investment strategy, in which case you can participate for where you are in the journey, but also give you a little bit of the ambition of what's available if you continue to put more of your capital towards this work, or encourage other partners to come to the table? What banks are you working with? Development banks? What financial institutions? Philanthropies, foundations? Your own, or those associated with your founders? Or maybe just those you have gone in and done great community project work before? Bring your community together and say, this is how we all kind of can tackle this. Which is exactly what AII is trying to do, is bring all these multiple stakeholders together, say, here's a playbook, let's start demonstrating through activating these funds. Yeah, I mean, is that kind of how you're seeing the use of this playbook and also the role of the corporates as well?
Exactly. And ideally, this is not a static playbook, right? We have the ambition is to make sure that we are able to collect all of this piece of information, as you mentioned before, the different funds. Maybe there's one in Southeast Asia, there was one in Latin America, there's one in the US, and making sure that we have enough information to put out there to corporates, to financial institutions, to facilities, so that they can make correct decisions based on the ambitions that they have set for themselves, right? So if we know that a brand is really interested on the generation of renewable energy, then we can point them towards a specific financial tool so that they're not overwhelmed with the thousands of different asks, and that they can really quickly and efficiently put their money into the projects that they really want to support, because they go well within their scope and mandate, instead of, spreading out a bit here, a bit there to see what's the best use of their money. This is really targeted action so that, corporates, facilities are able to really access the capital that's needed and that's out there efficiently. So yeah, we aim to have this really updated as much as possible, so that people can make decisions with the best information available out there.
As you know, I'm as excited about this part of our work unfolding as I am about all the parts, because they all fit and they're all necessary. So we've got AII building an inventory of programs and solutions. That is this portfolio that factories and facilities and suppliers can take on. We've got a portfolio of facilities, like now through our carbon tech assessments, our carbon leadership program, our clean by design program, and all the new grant making programs we're building into the portfolio. We have an inventory of active suppliers who are interested in working with AII and our partners to bring these initiatives in. And now we're building a portfolio of the finance, so that now you've got the trifecta, right? And you crowd around all the various stakeholders, and everybody sees, okay, this is what to do and how to do it. This is an active audience of users of these solutions and technologies. And here's an active marketplace of finance that's better and faster and easier to access for those users of the capital.
Exactly.
What's better than that, right?
Exactly. And it just creates, it's a virtuous cycle, right? The more you use one, the more you use the other. And then it sort of, generates a lot more synergies than anything else. So yeah, I think and this has been a natural progression of AII, right? Without the implementation of our programs, I don't think we could have come up with the CSP, or the climate solutions portfolio approach. And without the CSP approach, we couldn't have come to the blended capital approach. And then the blended capital approach sort of emphasizes that it needs the programs and that it needs the CSP in order to generate the pipeline needed to feed it into, or to feed into the financial institution asks that are really the capital asks.
So, all right, we're coming towards the end of our time together. And Gio, I love talking about this, as you know, and so I could do a whole other hour just diving into nuances of how will the Fashion Climate Fund generate towards this, and how will we attract and retain new partnerships, and what are we doing around retaining that? Yeah, there's so much more to talk about, but we can't go there right now because we're keeping this into a limited under-hour podcast. However, what is your call to action? Like for the audiences that are listening today, which could be multiple, it could be financial institutions, philanthropies, brand retailers, suppliers. What do you want for them coming out of this podcast?
Yeah, I think it's two asks, and the first one goes back to the fit for purpose design that we're trying to take on, and the, I guess, multi-stakeholder approach that we're trying to take on. So the first one is we need as much information as possible, right? So we need to hear from facilities, we need to hear from other NGOs, we need to hear from financial institutions as to why not, or why are we still having this $1 trillion gap and it's not shortening? Is it because there are market failures that we are failing to address? And if so, how would you see them being addressed? Or is it because, there are simply not enough conditions met out there so that this transfer of capital can be done properly? So we need to have conversations with you around those topics. We need to be able to input that information into the design of the products that we have, because we really want to make them usable for pretty much everybody, and we want to make them replicable for pretty much all of the other actors out there. So we want to make sure that we design things properly and that we are able to deploy them properly. The second would be to engage you more, I guess, a little bit into how they can put their dollars to good use through AII programs, the climate solutions portfolio, or the two work streams that we're developing right now. There's ample space for investors to come in and voice their desires. There's a lot of buy-in from our partners, both lead partners of the Fashion Climate Fund, but also external parties that we're partnering up with right now that will most likely than not anchor a lot of these working streams. But we need more firing power in order to make sure that we reach the scale necessary to be replicable and to create this demonstration effect that then will generate $1 trillion for the sector. So yeah, that's my invitation for stakeholders and for other parties out there.
I join you in those calls to action. We want you with us, and we're going to obviously have all the information about how to reach AII, how to find out more. We'll share more materials with anyone that's interested, in the comment boxes, and all we can answer as well. That being said, I think we need to call today to a close. But Gio, I just want to thank you not only for joining me today, but just for this past amazing year of work that we've been doing together and getting this off the ground. It's so much fun to have a vision and then to start. I always use the word operationalizing it, but now our new word is activating. So we've gone from vision to operationalizing, and now to activation. So thank you for all the work you're doing. It's just, it's so great.
Yeah, echo that feeling.
And with that, we'll say goodbye for the day. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll look forward to sharing more conversations with you in the near future. Bye.